Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Index Podcast. We are still in beautiful Thailand in Sugarden, this time with a slightly more fancy setup. And we are obviously in Boxer's house. Thanks to Sugarden for providing us with this space. It's been a really good time here. I am obviously joined by my co-host, Hildobi, resident data house of Dragonfly. And we have found Nixo here. And Nixo is the chief Nerd Wrangler at EthStaker.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I am Boxer, and I'm the community powers of Dune, of course. And before we start, nothing we say here should be relied upon as legal, financial, investment, tax, or even life advice. And we are acting independently of our professional respective roles here. Nixo, thanks for joining us. I think I'm very happy that we got this kind of roundtable together, because Dobby is obviously the chief data expert on all things ETH staking, and has done a lot of great work on kind of just making sure the ecosystem has any idea what's happening in ETH staking, especially in kind of like more open source data. There's a few like private data providers, and Rated does a lot of stuff with like ETH staking or like ETH node operators and all of this stuff. But in the end, this man really surfaced all the data. And Nixo is fighting for the solo stakers. So maybe if you can kind of like go through the journey of how you got here, and why do you care about this topic so much?
Yeah, for sure. So I had been in crypto for a few years, but I hadn't really found like the thing that drew me in and made like Nerd Snipe tweet. And at some point in 2020, I kept hearing number 32, and I started looking into it. And in 2021, I started staking just past Genesis, so I'll never have that badge of pride. But staking is like what really drew me in. And once I started volunteering with EthStaker, actually, because EthStaker was just like a loose organization, a loose community of people. Started volunteering for EthStaker. And then I actually worked as a scientist at the time, as an academic scientist. And I left my career to work in Ethereum, and I went hard into staking. And it seemed like the thing. Crypto was always like made a lot of really big promises about how the world can change, and there were a lot of ICOs. There was a lot of like mania about which coin to buy next. And staking, especially solo staking, seemed to me like the first actual incarnation of that promise. Like, we are going to make sure that this is accessible to people, and make sure that it's verifiable, and that anybody can participate in creating this chain. And so it was the first thing that drew me in a way that was like more ideological than everything that everything else that happened in crypto, really. And then through my continued involvement at EthStaker, I eventually became the executive director of EthStaker. And so that's my role now, but I'm actually transitioning now from EthStaker, passing on all my responsibilities to somebody else, because I got hired by the EA recently. And so in January, I will be full-time at the EA.
Okay. Interesting journey. And maybe if you can quickly walk us through kind of high level, what does EthStaker do?
Yeah, so EthStaker is a large community of people. Our subreddit has 50,000 participants. Our Discord has, I think, 30,000 participants. And what it started out as is just a group of people. It was started by Superfizz and Lamboshi. And it started out as just a group of people who were interested in staking, and they wanted to sort of bootstrap the solo staking experience. So they started creating guides and resources and kind of nerding out with each other about the setup process. And it became like sort of the canonical resource for solo stakers to come and ask questions and pool all of their guides and resources together. It's now a nonprofit, a 501c4 in Delaware. It doesn't matter. It's a nonprofit to US. It is managed by seven people. Most of them volunteer most of their time. They're not like full-time employees or anything. But yeah, it's just a neutral platform where people can come get their questions answered and interact with other solo stakers.
Okay, cool. And then just maybe we have listeners who are very unfamiliar with the space. So just in like 3 sentences, like what is staking? Why would I do that?
So staking is how the chain is created and secured. So you have all these transactions being added to the chain, and in centralized systems, you don't need more than one party to be adding those transactions to a database or a server. But in blockchains, you have a bunch of different players so that everything is credibly neutral. And in Ethereum is the chain that has the most amount of node operators, especially like smaller node operators, because a lot of other proof of stake chains utilize big professional operators. And Ethereum is available to verify and add to the chain in a way that you don't need a gigantic setup or a lot of electricity. And you earn money for doing so.
Yeah. So you currently help to verify Ethereum transactions from your basement, garage, wherever your EthStaker or your staking machine.
Well, I would know. That's enough to let me use their internet. So I verify the truth from other people.
Okay. Okay. You help other people there. Oh, like I guess it's your staker, it's your machines. Okay.
They're like, I don't know, she's drunk. I was like, hope it's not spying.
Yeah.
My friends trust me for some reason.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. You like went the extra step. You're a nomad. You're still running the machines. Okay.
I have friends who were like, please don't drop a computer off at my house because it passed. Somebody asked, hey, can I run a note from your house? And I'm like, please stop. Get rid of my number. I try to run one in Antarctica because I have a bunch of friends who work in Antarctica from my past career. But fun story, one of them told me that they ended up talking to some astronauts on the ISS, and they got in trouble for that. And so after they got in trouble, that's when the conversation was happening about whether or not we could run just a validator again. But they were like, no.
Yeah. Damn. You need to set up one in some wilderness with just like space internet from Elon and like.
I'd be really excited if I could set up the first validator client from Antarctica.
Yeah, that would have been sick. Yeah.
In space as well could be cool.
Yeah, space. Yeah. But yeah. So much for an intro for e-staking. I think the best way to probably approach this conversation is kind of like look at the broader landscape of staking and like why does it matter and who are the players. And then of course the kind of e-staker wants there to be more solo stakers, right? So I think we'll dive into that part of the conversation later, and why is it hard to be a solo staker, and what could we as a space maybe do to improve that?
So when the Beacon chain first launched, there were a large amount of solo stakers, and like there was a liquid staking pool. Lido came on. There were some professional operators, but in general, like people wanted to see how it went before they put their capital in, especially before they put other people's capital in, if they were a professional operator managing other people's money. And so the number of solo stakers has been, the ratio of solo stakers has been sort of trending down.
Yeah.
Arguably, because we don't have like a solid number on the number of solo stakers. And there was a report that came out from StakeCat that said that it's been sort of consistent and maybe even increasing, but that data is not necessarily, that data is difficult to get. And so over time, we've seen the share of liquid staking tokens on the Beacon chain increase. And so pools like Rocket Pool, Lido, EtherFi, all of these different ones have gained more people saying, I want to stake because I heard it's like the super safe way of generating yield on E. And so I just want somebody else to manage it because I heard staking is really hard and I don't want to run this. I'm not like one of those nerds who run a little computer in my house. Oh, so you have to upgrade capital in and earn Zingo. Coinbase, like centralized exchanges like Coinbase, Kraken, they also offer the opportunity to use just to like hit a little button like MetaMask had that little sign now or the little thing that just says stake. So that portion has been increasing. And so we've seen the actual amount of stake, the ratio of like stake deeds to not stake deed go, it's just an up only over time, especially after withdrawals were enabled at the Chapella hard fork.
Mm-hmm.
And so the concern now is like how much stake is actually like how how much ETH do we need staked on the chain to secure the chain? How much is it staked? And is the landscape of stakers actually like a healthy set of stakers?
Okay, so talking about the macro landscape first, let's first look at like how much even is staked, what is the percentage, and it's been basically on the rise in a fairly constant chart. I mean, it's basically up and to the right. It's, you know, your ideal BD team's charts. But in terms of portion, I think we're just under 30% currently. Where do you even see that in the long term? In terms of percentage, do you have a kind of percentage of the supply that would be a fair amount? Or, you know, because it's kind of like the saying, like, if everyone's a superhero, no one's a superhero. So if everyone's staking, like, what even is the point at some points? Like, what?
Yeah, so, I mean, to talk about that, we really have to talk about what the point of staking is. Staking secures the chain, and so if there's ever an attack on the chain, you want enough capital in there to be able to withstand that is that. And so you can ask people who are researchers on the chain, like, I think it was Dangrad, like, people have been asked, what do you think, like, the minimum viable security that we need is? And the numbers that you get from researchers are somewhere between, like, 1 and 10 or 1 and 15%. And right now we're at 28%. And so that ends up just being ways to create money. So we may not be gaining any meaningful security from the amount of stake that we have right now. And you said, like, where do I think that's going to end up? And I think that the way that we're going and that way that the issuance curve is structured, we could end up at 99% state. Couldn't end up at 100 because we still didn't eat ads. But if you have a lot of like especially ETFs, if that we ever get staking ETFs, that could be a way for your grandmother to just be like, I don't know, it's like 4% yield. Of course, I'm going to do this. But they have no idea what they're doing. They're not sophisticated actors. They don't care about Ethereum, that somebody is just delegating their capital in order for the manager of that capital to take on whatever risk they deem necessary or they deem safe. And so you get a large majority of EthStaker that's not really doing much to secure the chain. It's just become this money printer where people feel like entitled to staking yield, and they're just like, well, staking should be accessible to everyone. And my feeling is that staking should not be. This is not a thing that should be accessible to everyone. This is a specialized thing that people do to secure a blockchain, and you shouldn't be able to just not know what Ethereum is and also participate in securing a chain. In 99% of ETH staked, then are you really, like, that capital isn't really securing the chain? Because say there was a large slashing event and we end up losing that, are we really not going to bail out 99% of the chain?
Yeah. Well, the other angle is when you're earning yield at your bank, do you necessarily know what's going on?
Right. But
you know,
do we want this new financial tool that we're building to look like a traditional financial system that catalyzed the creation of Bitcoin in the first place? Because what the bank does is it layers risk on top of risk. And we found out, especially in 2008 financial crisis, that like the players who were managing capital don't even necessarily understand the risks that they're taking.
Yeah, so know how risky you are when you're taking on higher yield, essentially.
Great. I mean, like, the sad thing is like, when you get 5% yield and say, like, you think it's a 5% risk, those things aren't considered equally. People do not consider risk the same way they consider reward. People are gambling, and we see that and we see that in crypto, and they're willing to take bigger risks for the possibility of either consistent reward or big rewards.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I think that definitely is how I see it as well. So we got this percentage of the stake. We'll see where it goes. If we were to extrapolate the past, it probably goes up still quite a bit. We'll see where it eventually settles. I think that will be very interesting to see what comes at play eventually.
I mean, this is a whole other topic, but I am hoping before we even get to that point, before we even see where that happens, we can land on we can land on a decision for the issuance curve, because basically, like when we came out with the current issuance curve, it wasn't a well thought out issuance where like it was like, okay, yeah, well, depending on the amount of EthStake, we'll bring down the yield. When the curve was thought about, the primary concern was that there would not be enough stakers, and we are so long.
Yeah.
That.
Okay. That's different thinking. Actually, fun fact: when I worked on this data, it was around Beacon Chain, right after the Beacon Chain launched. I released a dashboard. No one cared. Like I had 2 likes. No one really cared at all. And some of the first people to care were actually EthStaker. I was in touch with Superfizz, and it's my first grant. I was part of your quadratic funding grant in 2022. I don't know, over 2 years ago, definitely over. I was independent by around that time, and yeah. No, like EthStaker specific quadratic funding round. Yes, exactly. That meant a lot to me. Thank you. But yeah, so at that time, not many people cared, and I think the wave of inflow of like, oh wait, we actually should care, was also probably around the merge to me, where there was withdrawals involved, and now there's more stuff going on. And interestingly, I don't think people cared all that much beforehand. Although it was like future, yeah.
It was this confusing thing that was running in parallel to the actual, to everything that was actually going on at Ethereum. And people were like, this is sort of in beta. ETH2 is coming, I'm short.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like until the momentum built for the merge that I think that people were like, oh, this is real. It's really going to happen, especially if there was the narrative on Twitter, like ETH2 was never coming.
Yeah. I remember this long time ago now.
So you just laid out that basically you're saying the issuance curve is not structured in a way that's sustainable, and it kind of like even creates wrong incentives where now we're kind of like, we have like, we'll probably or like in Europe, there's already staked ETH ETFs. A lot of the landscape is kind of like centralized because like, I think when the system was designed, the idea was very much like, this is going to be individual solo stakers, right? It was not like, there's going to be Lido and there's going to be all of these centralized exchanges who are going to offer this as a service. So maybe, Dobby, if you could quickly walk us through the numbers, and then, or maybe Nixo first. What are like, why should we care about, like, what's the difference between like a centralized exchange? Like I gave them my capital and then I'm helping to like secure the network. How does that differ from you like going all the way and even asking friends to like host solo stakers in their garages?
Yeah, so I'll start off with a concrete example that it's like that is easier to see sort of how it matters, which is so when you run a validator, you have 2 different clients. You have a consensus layer client and you have an execution layer client. Yeah. It does not matter what those are. Those are 2 pieces of software that people run on their validators. The reason why Ethereum has never halted, the reason why it's never gone down, is because there are different clients that you can run. So we'll just call them client 1, clients, software 1, and software 2. Software 1, there are 5 different versions of that software. Software 2, there are 6 different versions of that software, and you can run any number of those.
Yeah.
And when you run, if you only had 1 version of each software, when that software had a bug, that you were halted. You would no longer be able to process any transactions. But because we have such good diversity in both of those softwares, when we have had bugs, we definitely had bugs. When that happens, the other software continue working just fine. And we had a push in the last like 2 years, one for software number 1 to get to like make the diversity better, because it was mostly one client and then like small amounts of the other ones. And the first people to react to that call were solo stakers, any kinds of home stakers. It actually took a great big push to get professional operators to pay attention to this call. And it wasn't just because, so there are a couple of reasons why this is because they hire engineering teams who are very good at networking, who are very good at sysadmin, but not necessarily like very engaged in Ethereum, not necessarily like ideological. And so they make sure the thing is running, and they assume it's going to keep running, and they keep updating their software, but they're not paying attention to these calls in the community that say like that Earth Fire clients, like this super majority client needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And the other reason is because it's a big engineering lift. It costs money to get people to go in and go do the research, figure out which client is compatible with the other client that we run with the software number two's client, and make sure that we don't have any downtime. And so it's an engineering work. Whereas home stakers are like, what, I'm going to lose like $3 if my validator is down for a few minutes. Like, what do I care? I'm the person that I answer to. And so having home stakers and solo stakers like very quickly reacts to ideological or like things that keep chain healthy in a way that transactions keep processing. I ranted so long about that I forgot your actual question.
No, I think that's like a good part of it. But then it's also like professional node operators, they just operate in data centers, right? They don't even run on bare metal. They don't have a garage or a factory where they run these. It's just like in AWS data centers or
I would
wherever.
an unprofessional operator, an unprofessional professional operator if they were running it out of their homes because they're using other people's capital. They need to make sure that they have like the best systems. And like the professional operators should be running out of these data centers because they are managing other people's capital.
Okay, but that in turn also kind of enables them to be shut down if there's any ever government interference or something like that. Like
that's one of those risks that's like it's so what is the word I'm looking for? It's one of those like existential risks that people talk about. Like the government could come shut down AWS and then Ethereum would vault. And I don't expect that to ever happen, but it is good to be resilient against those things. And the reason that I argue for more solo stakers and for a healthier landscape and for lower issuance is not necessarily because of those existential risks, because they're such a tiny little risk. I think there are like much more real concerns that we can talk about, and that it goes into a whole governance conversation. So maybe we'll move on to that at some point in this conversation.
Yeah, Dobby, maybe run us through how fucked are we at the moment? Like, how centralized is the system already?
Okay, so I went over 30% essentially is staked, 28% of ETH. In terms of distribution, I think that's also interesting. The two largest share are going to be central exchanges and liquid staking. Also depends on how you qualify both of those, because Coinbase is both. They have CB ETH, but they also are a centralized exchange. So we'll say basically over half is those two. Then there's what I label as staking pools, which is kind of a way to like put all the rest into something that is not solo, but there's so many nuances that you can't really like break it down to everything. Otherwise, I would just have an infinite amount of different tags. So I try to bundle into this, and this takes 16%. Restaking recently has taken quite a bit of the market, over 8%. Actually, this is a little underlabeled. I have unidentified. That's the pool I'm constantly trying to eat at. And what I have labeled as solo stakers is around currently 1%. The thing with my method is that it's definitely imperfect if you look at it from, I just want to identify solo stakers from that point of view. I'm looking at the macro pie and trying to identify as much as possible from it. So it's not the same objective as hey, how many solo stakers are there? Who are they? That's kind of a different angle. So if you want to look at solo stakers, I wouldn't say rely on my data. It is a good starting point, but the way I labeled those was with ENS addresses and trying to identify things I could see from on-chain data that pointed towards those being solo stakers. I don't want to dox also, and I'm happy to dox custodians than solo stakers. And yes, so that's why it's only 1%, where other places will quote a much higher percentage, which is more representative.
I think rated their last estimation was around 7 or 8%.
Yes.
Stakecat came out with a report that said somewhere between 9 and 19%. Large. Fortune rare.
Very broad. From my point of view, the part I've identified is 18%. I know at least around 4% of those is Coinbase. So they're at 15% overall. So it leaves us with 1% solo, and then maybe like 14% max, I would say, on Metadata. But it also depends how you qualify Rocket Pool. There's like so many nuances to this where it's hard to get a definite answer and something to agree on.
So every validator is 32E. That is how it works on the chain right now. It'll change in the next hard fork. Though every validator has to be between 32 and 2048. But that's a really high barrier, financial barrier. And so right now, I think that's like $120,000, which is an insane amount of money for most people in the world. So there are all protocols built on top of Ethereum staking that make this financial barrier more accessible. One of those is Rocket Pool. The way that works is that you put a certain amount of capital in, and then that smart contract takes in other people's ETH who want to liquid stake. So they put in ETH, they get our ETH back. And then it takes that ETH that they put in the contract and matches it to a node operator. Somebody who's put in a certain amount of capital as a bond. So it matches them with that 30 ETH. So say in Rocket Pool currently, but in 8 ETH, it matches you with 24 ETH. Yep. You can't actually access that 24 ETH, but you're operating other people's capital. And for that, you get a commission from the receipts that come from that 24 ETH. Most of the people who are Rocket Pool operators, because Rocket Pool did a really good job of just like creating a community and onboarding node operators and creating really good resources, are home stakers, are people running from home, or there's also like a large contingent of people who run on all nodes, which is ends up being like a little bit more centralized. But anybody who's like Rocket Pool controls the configuration of their validator. So those clients, the software that they choose on their validator, they get to choose how those things are configured. And for me, that is the most important part, whether or not you control the configuration of your validator, because that means that you're able to quickly respond to problems with the chain and be a more responsible operator and generally be a good steward of Ethereum. So I would call a Rocket Pool operator who is running their node at home a home staker. And I think home staker is an independent operator, same as a solo staker. I don't necessarily think that the term solo staker is like a very good definition, because a solo staker can also be someone who's running 32 ETH in a validator, but is managed by somebody else, is like in a data center. And whether or not they need control of the configuration. So like if you are running all nodes, you don't get to choose your flight. And so I think the important thing to consider here is an independent node operator, but that's not as catchy as solo staker.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. From my perspective, I can't see the config. So that's why I labeled them as solo stakers, because it's like independent people that could have used the service or AWS or whatever. But from that angle, I couldn't label. But there was other interesting attempts at labeling this data. One of those being interesting by Rated, who has an algorithm that they've been working on and sharing bits of pieces of. And they also have these data sets, the output data sets, which I think got interesting when Starkware launched their token, because it became one of the criterion for the airdrop. And that led to, of course, some drama in both ways, as all airdrops do, because some people are like, wait, I wasn't identified as a solo staker, but I should have been. Of course, it never happens the other way around, but you know. But yeah, you had some people essentially creating issues on the repo saying, hey, like, can you add me? You missed me, blah, blah, blah. And there's a ton of issues that were created just like this. Whether there were really solo stakers or not remains up for interpretation, but there's definitely, like, no one has the perfect count. That's a big problem, is we can't actually quantify this share. But also in a way, I would say by design, because the point of solo staking is not to KYC and share everything and be fully decentralized. Means anyone can do it from their home without needing to disclose or whatever, which is super cool. But it makes it hard to assess how big and important it is of the pie. So yes, where would you say, so there's Rated, there's also, I forgot the other name, Stakehat, who did another one, but the estimates are extremely wild in terms of there's 10% difference between like...
I mean, we should talk about why it's so hard to buy solo stakers.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. Is they're struggling. What's the way forward into a better estimate? What would you say is your answer to this?
I mean, that's a great question. He had not like reached an answer to that. Otherwise, he would know the number of solo stakers. But like when the Meeking chain launched and people were throwing their capital as solo stakers, understandably, when you're throwing that much money, at that point, it was like $400, I think. It was a lot less money, but it was still quite a lot of money. And so people understandably created addresses that were hard to identify. Some of them were brand new addresses. Some of them look like Coinbase stakers because that's all they've ever used that address for. Because they're home stakers, they're not necessarily networking experts, and so they're not super secure in their firewalls or like how all of this works. Some of them are staking and they don't know what's possible in terms of like getting wrenched or like somebody like hacking into their validator and stealing their private keys. And so the best security is just to stay obscure, is to not self-identify. And there have been attempts to either identify solo stakers with on-chain data, which is already difficult because a lot of them are intentionally obscuring their data, or have them self-identify, which also is problematic because you can use these metrics like these lists and in conjunction with like, okay, turn off your validator for 2 attestations, and that proves that you actually control this validator.
Yeah.
But you could get professional, like if there were incentives to identify as a solo staker, like airdrops, you could get a professional operator going like, why wouldn't we go after this 2%? We'll pretend like we're solo stakers because we are and we used a bunch of different addresses and we can plausibly like label a bunch of these as solo stakers. And so either identifying with on-chain data or having people self-identify, both of them are problematic and not imperfect. What was the actual question?
How do we go from here?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. We would like more data on solo stakers. And the primary reason that we need more data on solo stakers is because solo stakers don't benefit from the economies of scale. When you have a liquid staking protocol, they maybe can run one node with 9,000 validators on it, which means that their hardware costs are much lower in terms of the ratio of the hardware cost versus like the amount of reward they're getting. And so, and they can smooth a thing called NEV for rewards, which are very volatile for validator. And every validator on average gets a proposal every 5 months right now. And the NEV reward that you get attached to that proposal, depending on if you're using the boost, which is another conversation, so it's not important to know what that is right now, varies. So it could be a 0.01 ETH reward, or it can be a 15 ETH reward. If you're only getting it every 5 months because you're on one validator, then you're kind of getting screwed by the average.
Much less predictable in terms of revenue and what are the risks you're taking and kind of rewards for it. Of course, the bigger the pool, the more you can stabilize it. And
so solo stakers tend to be, especially if you're not taking the average, if you're taking like short-term looks at things, solo stakers tend to be a little bit less profitable than liquid staking protocols, which disincentivizes people from solo staking. Another reason that this is the case is because when you trade your ETH for a liquid staking token, you can get a token that is tax optimized, meaning you get this token and when you redeem it, it like keeps accruing value, but not necessarily income. And so a lot of solo stakers have this complaint that when you are receiving ETH as a reward, it's income, which is taxed, especially in European countries, up to like 40-50%. Whereas if it's long-term gains, it can be 0, 5, 10, 15%. And if you are just using a liquid staking protocol, you are just accruing money for that. You haven't cashed out it either. And so you could just call that long-term gains instead of income. And so for all those reasons, solo staking tends to be the less profitable way to go and the more energy intensive, like mind intensive way to go. So being able to identify solo stakers and preferentially incentivize them or like get them slightly higher rewards or something like that would be extremely beneficial to the health of the Ethereum staking banking.
Do you see a viable path towards kind of flipping those incentives so that as an individual, I'd be more keen on staking myself than through an LST?
I'll put it this way. If there's not a viable path, I don't think that Ethereum was worth it. Like if we cannot incentivize solo staking in the same way that we can incentivize the liquid staking protocols. Even just a tiny little percentage difference will eventually lead to the eradication of solo seekers, because that's how capital, that's how economic systems work. We will always converge on the most profitable thing to go to. And so we have no solo stakers on the chain. The chain is completely operated by some professional operators who are getting capital from your grandmother who has ETH in an ETX somewhere. I don't think that Ethereum is the thing that was promised.
Okay. Yeah.
First that was promised.
No, that's fair. Because like it's kind of a double-sided problem where you want to incentivize solo stakers, but you can't identify them really well. So, and it's easy to disguise yourself as one. Maybe if there was more profits to be made in that way, like some would do it. So it's a tough problem to solve for sure. And I'm kind of wondering exactly like what is a viable path in that sense. I think maybe Rated seems to have the best understanding of a good estimates. The thing is, estimates are always opinionated in the consideration and heuristics used. Yeah, of course.
It's not always like this isn't the only path forward is identifying and preferentially benefiting them. It is one path forward, and one I hope that it could nerd snipe some people to try to find this data, because this data is not there's no financial incentive to find this data. It's willing to be building your CV and like solving a difficult problem. But another path forward is something like anti-correlation penalties, which is mini IP. I forget which one it is. It's like 7 something. But the idea behind anti-correlation penalties is if I am Coinbase and I operate some infrastructure that runs a bunch of validators, likely if I have an error, my power goes down, something, a bunch of my validators are going to go down at the same time, which creates a correlation. And you can see that a lot of validators are down at the same time, which probably means it's a professional operator, and you penalize that more heavily than, say, the solo staker who has 10, 15 validators, and those all go offline at the same time. And you can tell that, okay, that person doesn't operate a lot of validators, and you can penalize them less. Another one that another correlation that you could add is like the withdrawal address. So like Lido right now uses its staking contract for all withdrawal for all validators that it runs, despite the fact that it has many different operators. It has 37 different operators for 98% of its stake, and it has I think over 100 validators for 2% of its stake with the community staking module and the DBT module. But it all goes to the same withdrawal contract. So that could be a correlation. And of course, like if you start making that, if you start adding those correlation penalties, then what's going to happen is Lido's going to be like, okay, we need to create a bunch of different withdrawal credentials or a bunch of different withdrawal addresses instead of just one staking contract. And that's sort of like an argument for and against anti-correlation penalties, in that when you call it against, or when it's like as an argument against anti-correlation penalties, it's because, well, won't these operators just decorrelate in ways that like make them difficult to identify still? On the for side, yes, they will decorrelate. They will try to do these things, but it makes their operations more expensive. And it makes the network more resilient, because then only some of their validators are going to go at the same time. So this is a win-win situation.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that would actually make sense. And at worst, they're more decentralized. So that's the worst case scenario.
Wait, so if I'm Coinbase and I just kind of, the unique key here is the withdrawal address, right? Like that's how you would assume correlation.
Not for Coinbase. I think Coinbase has different withdrawal addresses. You probably know better. But Lido has the same. It's because Lido is a staking contract. That staking contract is the withdrawal address for all of their validators.
Okay, but let's say even for Coinbase today, how would you penalize all of the Coinbase validators? Like what's the unique key that you can tie them together with?
So like missed attestations. If their power goes offline and a bunch of their validators are running from the same location on the same node, they could all go offline at the same time. Or they could there's a billion things that could happen on the chain that like shows like, I think those are operated by the same person or in the same location. Even if they all run on different servers in like the same general geographical location, that geographical location could have power blip or something like that. And maybe they're not even operated by all the same node operator. They're just in the same geographical area. That could still be something that's subject to correlation penalties, because then you're still saying like, we shouldn't have all of our validators running in some data center in Washington, D.C. And so we're going to penalize that for you and that incentivizes you to maybe move it to a different data center in Europe, somewhere in Europe or Australia. Or no, probably not Australia because their latency is bad. But
Okay, but then this wouldn't only apply to kind of per organization or per company or per entity. This would be like a general kind of, because like if I'm a like independent node operator and I run the same client that Coinbase does, and then the client just goes down, and then we all get like we are all correlated in that client going down, and we all get slashed. So like that's like a kind of, it would incentivize a global outcome for just more diversity of geographic location, like client configurations, all of this stuff. So it's not so much like, we're trying to like, it forces everyone in the network to disperse, and like you running your node in Antarctica, you're like safe from as long as the diesel generator doesn't go out or whatever. But yeah, okay. So it's not like decisively not like we can't just penalize like decentralized exchanges, because like in the end it's kind of like the correlations would be per config, per geographic location, per whatever. It's not like we can clearly identify this is Coinbase and all of their validators have gone down. It's just like this configuration of validators has gone down in this certain geographic area, and that's what we're going to penalize.
correct. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And I think that would just lead to a more resilient network. It would, especially when you think about the fact that like intentional co-location is a thing right now. And that's one thing that solo stakers are really good for, and that they don't intentionally co-locate. And the reason that you would co-locate is because when you're physically closer together, the latency is lower. And so you might have just better performing validators. And so if you were a professional operator who wants to co-locate with a builder or a relay or other validators, and you're getting penalized for that, you might want to like move out a little bit.
Yeah, I see.
So if you were to look at like anti-correlation penalties, it would actually be positive for many other ways, like diversifying in terms of hosts, not people moving away from AWS and like OVH and other centralized servers, because they could be correlated to other people using those services, as well as moving to minority clients that they feel are safe enough and have a broader diversified stake of like usage of clients, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because running a minority client like on the circus seems like a altruistic thing to do. You're like, I'm a minority client for the health of the network. But the fact is, if you're running a super majority client especially, and there's a bug, it's possible that your version of the chain could fork, and you can attest on that new fork, which would get you slashed on the old fork, on the canonical fork.
Yeah.
And so running a minority client is a selfish choice, and especially the anti-correlation penalties, it would be very much the rational choice to make as a validator.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. So it would have quite some externalities that would be positive for the ecosystem.
And just to point out, because we're talking about anti-correlation penalties, this EI key is very much in flux, and it's very much like the implementation is still being discussed, and it's not slated for any specific fork right now. And so if anybody wants to like brainstorm with the EI key authors, now is the best time to do that.
Sounds like an important problem to solve. If whatever like configuration of this EIP actually makes it through and like gets slotted for a hard fork, I guess like how big are the incentives to actually follow this? Because it's like, or like the other way around, asking me how often are these like outages or network failures, or like how often does Coinbase like miss attestations or something like that? Is there any data on this? Do you have any idea?
Yes. So Tony Mortstetter did an initial analysis of this to make sure that it actually would be effective, and he did see that identified solo stakers and rocket pool node operators would see fewer penalties, whereas professional operators would see more penalties. I forget what the exact difference was, but he has an ETH research post that shows the graph of the difference. But it does make enough of a meaningful difference for this to be worked on.
Okay. Shout out to Tony. Always great data. So then, like, I guess in absolute or relative terms, like, this could lead to kind of Coinbase having like 10% like relative less yield if they run their like the same configuration as today. Do we have any feel for that number?
I don't know the exact difference. So you'd have to go look at Tony's post to see like what the difference would be. But I imagine that any difference in yield would be temporary while they figured out how to like sidestep these penalties. But it would make some difference. And like the absolute difference in rewards is such, I can't emphasize how important that is. People say that solo stakers are altruistic, and I fight back against that because it creates this narrative like, oh, it's okay that solo stakers make a little bit less because they're doing it for ideology and for altruistic. Yeah, nobody's doing this for altruistic. We're doing this to make money. And like, I love that solo stakers are more ideological than professional operators, but if you incentivize them less, they are going to disappear.
Yeah, sure. Just from like a human perceived fairness thing, it's like, it's a very like, yeah, it just doesn't feel good to like do something where like you take the extra friction and then you don't even get rewarded. It's like over time that's like very demoralizing. So
yeah, especially when you're saying like you are the more important actor on this network for censorship resistance and decentralization, or we're going to pay you a little bit.
yeah, that sucks to hear. But yeah, maybe we should have Tony on and have him talk about this data. But that's a conversation for another day.
We should definitely have Tony on. Shout out Tony again. You talked about anti-correlation as an EIP, which is more for now theoretical and more than anywhere people impress. What are the other problems solo stakers are facing? You ran a poll at EthStaker where you had a bunch of solo stakers answer this, and I thought it would be interesting to look at, okay, what are the main problems to tackle for them to just lower the friction and also make it more enticing for them to come and stake from their house. So the poll where you had 868 answers, the first thing is supermajority client risk. So this anti-correlation policy actually would help in that regard. That's really cool. I didn't even think about it that way, but just realizing now. Second would be taxes. That's kind of an external, I mean, that's not in protocol stuff.
Right.
But
that was harder to solve because you need policymakers, and like, look, most of these nerds have nothing to do with policy lobbying or like talking to lawyers, and that part of the reason that's a risk is because you have all the different jurisdictions treating it differently. Like Germany is a particularly harsh one when it comes to staking rewards. The US is one where everybody's sort of just like YOLOing it, like talking to their accountant, and they're like, my accountant said do this and this is what I'm doing, and everybody's doing something different. And so like the burden, the anxiety of doing that, and like not knowing whether you're treating this correctly, not knowing if the IRS is going to come back to you in 4 years and be like, actually you owe more because we just figured out how staking works.
Yeah, no, it's and the tech is always ahead of policies in that regard, so that's forever going to be a problem. We have to figure out another way, or like how to play within the rules correctly. But there are others problems. One being hardware and key management. I think what would be your recommendation if I were to stake from home in terms of hardware? Because there's, I feel like many different ways to do it. What would you be your top recommendations?
So we actually have a page, I think it's ethstaker.cc/hardware, I think. Yeah. But it's basically just a 2 terabyte SSD where we've changed our recommendations to 4 terabytes to 4 terabytes right now because the size of that is going up.
Yeah.
But a 16 gigabyte RAM And like an Intel networks, some people stake on Raspberry Pis. I do not recommend that. That's going to make your life really difficult. But in general, like the recommended staking setup goes somewhere between $500 and $2,200. Like if you buy a DApp node is something that is pre-set up. You basically like it's got a graphical user interface, really easy to stake on it. And because of that, there's like a little bit of a premium on this because they have to ship it. They have to put these things together. And so it can be anywhere between $500 and $2,200, which changes the horizon of like how long you're making, or how long it takes to make up that hardware custom rewards.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have lots of hardware recommendations on our site, and like we don't have just one recommendation because again, that's another point in centralization. We don't want everybody running.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So, there's this discussion lately about do we need solo stakers because it's also a bottleneck to throughput of the chain and many other potential kind of latency improvements and whatever, because they are the lower bound requirements. They tend to be. Those aren't really set in stones in writing on like what should be the exact requirement. But there's different parts to it. So there's the financial of like, what is the upfront cost of it and how much time does it take for you to make that back? I believe you said around 6 months to a year of making back your initial investment is probably fair. I would agree. But there's other problems. And the next one they pointed out is internet issues. This is not really a problem you can solve at scale in an easy way, right? And you always have going to be areas in the world where the internet is just too bad, not good enough to solo stake. What do you think is the way that?
That's a complicated issue, and like one we've been seeing on crypto Twitter a lot in the last couple of months because we want to increase the throughput of the chain, and in order to do that, like we're on the L2 roadmap right now, which means that we need to increase the amount of data that L2s can write to the chain. Blobs. And blobs are very bandwidth heavy. And so right now the target of blobs is 3, the max blobs is 6. And we have seen calls to increase that to various numbers. But the idea, so Denkun is the hard fork that introduced blobs, and we saw a spike in bandwidth there. We're sort of seeing solo stakers, especially because they don't operate in data centers with gigabit fiber, struggle a little bit. And that conversation, the way that it started, we were thinking, okay, some solo stakers maybe in like somewhere in rural Brazil might be having some issues. But the more we talked about it, the more we got people to speak up who were like, no, I'm in Berlin and this is not working out for me, or I'm in the UK and this is not working out for me. And like the people who are largely part of this conversation are like very involved in Ethereum. And it's what we're hearing from people like Ben Edgington, who wrote the E2 book, .info, from people like Leftarius, who helped launch Ethereums. Yeah. If that's what we're hearing from like big voices like this, then what aren't we hearing? Because if I'm a solo staker who is not super engaged on crypto Twitter or whatever, and I'm not paying attention to these research questions about whether or not we can increase the number of blobs, but I'm running from home and I just notice my Netflix is slowing down, or like my girlfriend is not able to watch her show, or something like that, I'm not going to go on crypto Twitter and see what the latest research on Ethereum there is. I'm just turned off my validator. You're never going to hear from me again. You're never going to even know that I turned off my validator. And so paying attention to that lower bound is a little bit less about the lower bound than it is knowing what that lower bound is, because it's difficult. Because even so, they have some people who run on 12 megabits up. So megabits, I don't know. Megabits. Yeah, okay, megabytes. We have some people who run on 12 megabytes up.
Megabits. Oh, no, megabits. Yeah, sorry, megabits. Yeah, my bad. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, my bad.
People who run on 12 megabits up, and they run just fine. I know some people in Colorado who run on that, and they have no problems at all. But I know people who also run on 150 up, and they have issues. And that's not necessarily an issue with their network. It could be an issue with the router that they're using. Yeah. And that's not always a choice. So in the US, you have to be able to choose your own router from your ISP, but you might get bullied into using your ISP's router. In Europe, I think that you don't even have to have a choice of your router per ISP. And so you get, maybe I'm wrong, but I think my friend in Austria was saying that like they made sure they just like gave him a router and they were like, this is the one.
They give you the crappiest, shittiest router you can imagine, but you can just plug in another router. At least in Germany, and I would be surprised if it's not.
It might be, yeah. But in the US, at least, what ends up happening is people buy their own routers, they plug them in, they like say that I'm not going to use this shitty ISP one. But the ISP, you'll have a network issue or lightning will strike your cable, which, by the way, has happened to 2 people that I know. And when you call the ISP and you say, I'm a problem with my network, they say, we notice you have a router that is not ISP provided. So if you, because you own your own, it might be a problem with your own. So we're going to charge $99 to send those technician out unless you want to rent a router from us. So they get bullied into using these things. EthStaker right now is going to be experimenting with someone's network to try to do, this is like so over my head, but somebody very technical at EthStaker is basically going to install a router that acts as a dumb router or that turns your ISP's router into a dumb router. Anyway, it's a really technical solution. We're going to see if that works so that's something we can recommend to shitty ISP router problems. Yeah. But again, that makes this sort of more a technical endeavor. Yeah, exactly. And if you're telling people to stake and you're saying, oh, it's super easy, just get this second router that you add in front as a like you already make it more technical and you already lower the number of people. So
in general, I mean, in France and Netherlands where I lived, it's the same as Germany where they give you the shittiest one. If you plug already by Ethernet cable, is like miles better. Should fix most of those like issues from the router itself. But in general, I would recommend using your own if you can.
Most validators should be plugged in via Ethernet. We tell people they should be plugged in, but like even the modem could be like shitty. It could. I think there's something called like connection table that could get overrouted by the number of peers that validators are connecting to. Again, that's another thing that's way over my head that I just listen to more technical people and EthStaker on.
Is Starlink like feasible alternative actually?
Is what?
Starlink.
Oh, yeah. So some people report being able to stake with Starlink. Some people report having problems with Starlink. It's it's kind of a shitty solution if you're only running one validator because the amount that it costs probably eats all of your rewards for a month.
Yeah, it doesn't. You need to run like 2 nodes for. I don't know how expensive it is. It's like, I think where I was like I was compared like I recently moved places and. Actually, I think the price point was like not that much higher. I think like you need to buy the initial hardware, of course, which is like $300-$400 or something. But then it's like, I think they quoted me for like $50-$60 a month.
So that's a little bit more than half of your monthly rewards for one validator.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
But I would have general internet as well. So it's like, that's a cost I pay anyways, right?
Yes, your general internet is what you pay. And so that's what we want. Validators to be able to run on what you already have in your home rather than having to
but I could use the Starlink to also just use the internet. So it's like I would not kind of like get this additionally. It's just like I would replace it because like in Germany, like literally in some places it's a more rational choice to just get Starlink than to like get the cables into your house. It's completely ridiculous.
I'd be curious to know more about people who are staking with Starlink because I have heard people say they use it as their backup and it works fine, but I had not met anybody who uses it as their primary source of internet.
Yeah, I think that there's I was reading up on this and in the end it's like I think there's like some problems with like if the Starlink satellite doesn't or like the receiver doesn't see any satellite at the moment, which still sometimes happens, like very rarely, but you'll just drop the internet for like, and then you might miss like a slot or something. But like, I guess like over time will improve. The ping is also not that great, but I guess the ping wouldn't be that much of an issue for staking. But yeah, this is a conversation for another day. But you're saying it's not the hardware that's the constraint. It's mostly network issues that's actually a problem because the hardware cost is like we're still kind of tracking Moore's law and it's like costs kind of go down. Like if you look at the newest like M4 Apple Mac Mini or however that thing is called. It's like an insane piece of hardware for like $600, which you could probably run a solo staker from. I mean, not with a 2 terabyte configuration, like that would be a lot more expensive, but like maybe you plug in an external like 2 terabyte hard drive and then you got like a really good setup, which is like future proof for a long time for like whatever, $800 or something. That sounds like a really good.
And when you're talking about like moving up the size of the hard drive, like it's not that much of a cost. Like you're adding $150 to the cost. And so it's not that much to ask solo stakers to like move from one to the other. And like anybody who says like a validator should run on a Raspberry Pi, I think it's just trolling. There are like companies like Ethereum organizations like Ethereum on ARM who I'm glad that they exist and they do a lot to like push forward what we're working on to like test different ARM architecture. And that's what's going to get us to like validators on watches. But like right now, it's fine. We can run on Intel NUCs. They're perfectly affordable. We don't have to complain. And like internet definitely is the constraint right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think a hard drive also eventually kind of slowly becomes a non-issue as a hard drive kind of lower in price, but also right now blobs are being pruned and the eventual state of cold data seems to be headed in a way that it will be pruned in terms of after a bunch of period of time. We had a similar discussion with events on the previous episode, and that seemed like the potential logical end goal of like, you don't want to just accumulate, state size that just grows and grows and grows. Eventually, for a more stable system, you want measurable size that is constant. But
you can't prune state in Ethereum. You're saying like there's like you can prune events, you can prune call data, you can't prune state.
Yes, okay.
Just to make the differentiation, because like Solana has that inbuilt, even though the flip is kind of switched off. Like they're currently just accumulating states because their account rent is basically zero. But eventually, like they have a solution inbuilt for this problem, so they can over time kind of like get their state to a constant size, or at least like make like they can prune history. In Ethereum, we currently have no concept of actually doing like any state management. It's all just, it's going to be there forever, except if you like self-destruct contracts, but the incentives for that are like super minimal, so like nobody does that.
Yeah. No, I mean it's definitely not the case for now. I mean it's like something researchers are thinking about, and we had part of the discussion was about events being removed. Yeah. But cold data is also in the talks of how do we eventually manage this, and I think we'll eventually end up in a state where it's no longer a problem. So I don't think it's like the bottleneck is probably not in hardware size is what I'm getting at. But I want to move into something else. You, during your survey, you also asked how much maintenance it is to run a solo staker. I think that's also interesting because it's also kind of a bottleneck. You want to lower that as much as possible. And during your survey, where you had 870 answers roughly, the vast majority said under 4 hours, with a tail end a bit more.
Yes.
What am I maintaining? Once I've plugged everything, what is going on? What could be the issues? I'm guessing it's related to the previous issues like internet and hardware and everything, but like, is there anything else we're missing?
So the networking issues is what EthStaker tends to see a lot. So EthStaker runs a Discord server. We run a subreddit where a lot of people come in and they're like, hey, my validator went down. Like, I need help. And we have technical people in EthStaker who either are part of the core EthStaker team or just other stakers. And yeah, majority of the time that's a networking issue. And because that networking issues are so difficult because everybody's network looks different. But most of the time that people are spending on validators is just updating their clients. They log in, they update their clients, they make sure everything's good. Maybe they see they have a 2 terabyte hard drive and they don't have like any auto pruning on. And so they realize that their hard drive is full, or they just stop in testing. And they have to like sort of wipe the chain and start over and sync again. But yeah, when we ran the survey, most people said under 2 hours. And so I even got some people messaging me like, why wasn't minutes an option here? Because I spend almost no time running my validator. It's like, from personal experience, basically, I log in once every 4 months to see if I need an update, or even like just around hard forks. Yeah. Because
at first, when I was first setting my validator up, I messed with it a lot. And the more I mess with it, the more things go wrong. I've learned, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, if I do follow, like, personally, I follow the clients that I run. And if they have an urgent update, then I'll update it. But generally, if it's like, this is a low risk or like a low urgency update, I'm like, cool, gonna skip. Not touching my validator for anything. I'm not a super technical person. I'm like one of those people, when something goes wrong, I immediately go into the Discord and I'm like, you are ready to talk.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so it's not one of the biggest problems, is not management of a long term and maintenance, I mean.
Definitely not. And we saw in one of the other answers, like, what's one of your biggest concerns is key management. And key management is really difficult. And like key management in crypto in general is still such an issue because, I mean, that's why we need account instruction and solutions like this, is because you get these people creating keys, and like all of the guides say to like use an air gapped computer to create the keys. And like for a non-person, what the hell is an air matter? Oh, I just have a second computer sitting around that has never been connected to the internet that I transfer the between, no crumb. And so some people are just like YOLOing and they're like, okay, I'll just turn off my So like key management is an issue because they're like, okay, I YOLO this, like I'm obscure, no one knows that I run a validator, like that's the best security that I had. But honestly, I don't know. Maybe there was a virus on my computer maybe there was a keylogger on here, and like when I typed in my my seed phrase, maybe it was logged, or maybe I'd have my command line history is still on. And so it would be great if we had better advice and better processes than use an air-gapped computer to create keys.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. In there's two other things I think that are important in terms kind of the externalities and the issues we're trying to solve. One of them being represented by kind of like the host diversity. I was actually surprised. I thought AWS had a bigger share. It is 14% according to Rated. And then, yeah, there's not anything that's taking a huge portion of the like host market share. So that I would say that's a really good thing. Probably not a big worry in that sense. And then there's geographic distribution, which is also very interesting. So almost 40% is in the US, with Germany behind and a bunch of other countries. Would you say that we're sufficiently geo-decentralized?
No, and mostly because we're still missing. So basically, my standard of where we should have validators is the Steam map.
Yeah.
So where people are playing video games, because they have good internet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. So if you look at that Steam map, you can see that like a lot of Southeast Asia, Latin America, like I think Africa is a big fish to catch, but right now we're not gonna hit Africa because they have infrastructure problems that Ethereum can't solve. Like the Ethereum community can. But Latin America, they have plenty of room. They have the gigabit internet in some places. They've got very technical people. A lot of the staking resources are in English. EthStaker made a push. EthStaker and Ethereum.org made a push to translate a lot of our resources into Spanish or in other languages. And they're like with the announcement of the Beam chain, and there's like a client coming online in South America. I think it's called Lambda Class. And so there's generally more coming up, and like there's this huge push in Argentina right now with crypto because people from the crypto community have noticed that like stable coins are being hugely used by Argentina because the hyperinflation that's happening there. I recently spent like 8 months down in Argentina, and I met a lot of people who were like getting interested, staking, participating in some DVT protocols, participating in the light up protocol, and just generally like teaching other people about nodes. And so I think that's definitely missing from our geographical diversity map.
Okay, very interesting, the Steam data part. I didn't even consider this as like a basic requirement for like internet, and that's actually really smart.
It's perfect. I wish so. Chaindom for a little while had like a really good map of geographical diversity, And they were grabbing those for my IP addresses. I can't really use their map anymore because they did something weird with the contrast at the things. But like, I grabbed the Steam map and I wanted to put that next to the Chainbound map because I think that would be a really good goal of like where we're missing.
Yeah, that makes sense. What could we do to push for these to be adopted? Because the sense I'm getting is that these are also countries where 32 ETH is a fuck ton of money, and that is probably one of the big bottlenecks.
Yes. The very first thing that you can do is that map of geographical diversity of nodes, it's nodes, not validators, and those are free to run besides the hardware investment. And so the first thing you can do is teach people how to run nodes, and they're not earning rewards for that, but they are learning how to participate in the system. They are able to use that node to gather their own data from Ethereum. They don't have to pay they do.
To the street. The most part.
So they could be using that to like further their own education in Ethereum and crypto in general, because running nodes is like kind of a prerequisite for a lot of data collection. And so once they run these nodes, then there are lots of protocols coming online to lower the financial barrier. There are lots of ways to lower that financial barrier. You could come up with a DBT cluster that like splits the capital requirement across a bunch of different people. And there's talk about whether or not we would lower the minimum effective balance to something or maybe like 80 instead of the 32 that it currently is, because we're changing the maximum effective balance primarily to shrink the validator set to match the size of the node set. But that's
Makes sense.
another whole conversation. We could probably keep this conversation going for like 3 hours.
Yeah. But yeah, I think lowering stake is definitely one of the ways, but you still have even at 1 ETH, there's still a pretty high lower bound for a lot of countries. But I'm excited. Obviously, DVT and stuff like this does also help in lowering that barrier.
We would have to see the hardware requirements go down with DBT in order for that to be economically viable. Because if you're earning rewards on 1 ETH on a $500 machine, it's going to take you like 10 years to make up the cost to set up that machine. So we'll need the Ethereum on our people to make some progress.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a question. I just lost it. Oh fuck.
DJ.
We gotta wrap this up.
Oh yeah.
So what's on you?
Okay.
Yeah, have you have fun?
No. Well, I don't have any. I forgot it, so it's fine. Thanks a lot. That was really awesome. Thank you for coming here, talking about all this. I think it's definitely a problem to think about. And going forward, how do we consider solo stakers in the landscape of Ethereum? So yeah, I thank you for all this. This was super interesting. I think there's a lot to go off of, but there's also a lot of work to be done in all these EIPs, but also just how can we think about solo stakers more and making them a bigger part of the conversation without having them needing to dox and come out themselves. A hard problem for sure.
As a community, need to advocate the solo stakers better. And solo stakers also need to advocate for themselves better. But in general, like we need to make sure that Ethereum stays decentralized, and like in solo stakers is the way that we do that.
I agree. Yeah.
Seems like we need to push some governments to invest in better internet. That would be very nice.
ISPO at least.
Yeah, it really does seem to be like a big problem. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on. You have listened to the Index podcast from Zoo Garden in Thailand. I hope you have enjoyed this live episode. Thanks so much for coming on again. Do you want to plug anything in the end? Is there anything people should do, can do?
No, just thanks so much for hosting. I hope people listen to the whole thing and they can figure out from there.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Crypto data wizards, come join us for the parade. From Bitcoin ETF to Solana meme coin trade, uncovering public secrets in the blockchain shade. Bad chiller, cherry picking liar. We call them out and set chart crime on fire.